Lessons from the screen, what we mean is we go through different documentaries to tell you what they gon' do. Give you our lessons, give them our blessings. If they trash, we tell you there is no second guessing. Knowledge is power, but time is precious. And we're here to keep you from them lessons. So sit back as we groove, giving you the review, so you only spend time on the docs that you need to.
Welcome to another episode of Lessons from the Screen, the show where we give you a review of whether or not anything that you can get through any particular screen is worth your time. We waste our time, our energy, and our brain power so that you don't have to. You're welcome. Lessons from the Screen is brought to you by PAX Inc. through the Freedom Train Network. You can find us on www.freedomtrainradio.com or on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. Be sure to head to whatever preferred place of your choosing and leave us a review. Be sure to go to the freedomtrainradio.com and talk to us. Let us know what you think, you agree, you disagree. We love it all. And then be sure to head over to www.pactsinc.org. That's paxinc.org to show some love and support for our sponsors because they're doing big things, especially in that learning center. Go check that out. PAX Inc. is a black activist and advocacy organization focused on developing the black community through a shift in culture, education, and economics. In this week's episode of Lessons from the Screen, we will be looking at the president's budget proposal and its potential impact on the community, as well as things that we can learn. The budget proposal was released Monday, February 12th, and while budget proposals from the executive office have to be approved by Congress, they do tell a lot about the priorities of the administration, as well as the party they represent and the people that elected them. With that in mind, we will be digging into this a little bit because it's a long document. It's a lot of information. In this episode of Lessons from the Screen, the president's second budget. So moving forward, before we get too deep into this, we're going to give a brief overview of how the budget is supposed to work. So every year in February, the executive branch or the president submits a budget request to Congress, aka a budget proposal, for the coming fiscal year starting October 1st. Now, the House and the Senate, both have their own committees on the budget who write their own budget resolutions. After they write their budget resolutions, the appropriations committees, and there are 12 appropriations subcommittees, create their own bills in the House and the Senate. So now we're working with 24 total documents. Now, of those 24 documents, which basically detail discretionary spending, which is optional spending, and mandatory spending or non-discretionary spending, of those 24 documents, they get voted on and approved in the committees. Once they're approved in the committees, there is a conference committee that comes together and creates and combines those 24 documents into 12 documents. Now, then the House and the Senate as a whole vote on these 12 documents, and they send those 12 documents as they're approved to the president for signature to become law and to become budget. Now, this process rarely works out that way. It is much more complicated than it even sounds in practice because of all of the various political forces that are involved. But needless to say, this rarely happens, which is why we have so many continuing resolutions going on and why there is a threat of government shutdown damn near every month, seems like, at least once or twice a year. So that's what we got going on. That's how it's supposed to work. That's not how it works, but that's how it's supposed to work. So now we're going to move forward into the budget. Now, we haven't done anything quite this size on this show before. This is 3 documents combined. If you want the full picture with context, there's the 160-page actual budget proposal. Then there's a 26-page addendum, which makes various changes for increases and various other things going on in the budget. And then there's a 202-page major savings and reform report, which gives a little bit more detail and insight into why some of the numbers in the budget are the way they are from the perspective of the executive office. So moving forward, what we're going to do is I'm going to go over various different components of the budget that I feel are most important for us, not in the future or anything like that, just for where we are right now, things that we should be paying attention to, in my opinion, of course. And so I'm going to read those, and then I'm going to give my opinion. And then after I give my opinion on that particular subject, going to move down to the next area. Now, like I said, I'm not going to touch every single thing in this document. I'm not even going to touch every single important thing. And there are some things that I feel are just as important as what I picked. But for various other reasons, I chose to include these things in this show. So if you want more insight, you're going to need to go to www.freedomtrainradio.com, go to the lessons from the screen area, scroll down until you see this show, President's Second Budget, and then click on that, and all three documents will be there. When it comes to documentation like this, you need to look at it for yourself. Don't rely solely on media outlets. Don't rely solely on news articles. Don't rely solely on secondhand opinions. Go and look at these documents for yourself. Every last single one of us is smart enough to be able to interpret what's in these things and make up our own minds. So I'm going to read the first two paragraphs, and then I'm going to give you the 12 pillars that this budget is built on. So the first two paragraphs. In 1 year of working together, we have laid the foundation for a new era of American greatness. We have boosted economic growth, created more than 2 million jobs, and added nearly $5 trillion in new wealth to the stock market. Unemployment is at a 17-year low, wages are rising, and jobs are returning to America. Starting this month, hardworking Americans are going to see increased take-home pay because of the massive tax cuts and tax reform legislation we enacted at the end of last year. America is back to winning again. A great spirit of optimism continues to sweep across our nation. Americans can once again be truly confident that our brightest days are ahead of us. Now, we all know that he's taking credit for an economy that he inherited. That's been said on previous shows and is being said all over the planet. So, just kind of skip over those kinds of things. So we're getting into the 12 pillars this thing is built on. The very first one is ending wasteful spending. And after I give you these things, I'm going to give you at least one major point of the pillar. So the first one, again, is ending wasteful spending. And in this proposal, this particular pillar says that this budget makes hard choices to stop wasteful spending, lowering the debt, and focusing the government on protecting the nation, which the document does say is the primary goal of the federal government. Now, pillar number 2, expanding economic growth and opportunity. So this proposal says that there is a goal to have the U.S. become a net energy exporter by 2026, and that this budget puts the economy on goal for a sustainable 3% long-term growth. Now, I'm going to stop right there because right now the economy is considered to be somewhat overheating or approaching overheat territory, and we're only at 1.9 to 2% growth. So there is a such thing as growing too much too fast and creating an overheated economy which can't sustain itself. And by all accounts, history and the most professional and brightest economists, both conservative and liberal from both sides of the aisle, they all seem to agree that 3% growth of an economy our size is simply not sustainable. So without getting too much into the economics of the economy per se and straying too far away from this actual budget document, we're just going to leave it there. Pillar 3, preserve the peace through strength. This pillar proposes to rebuild and modernize the military, both technologically and by increasing the manpower, and also speaks to giving the military a raise. And then there's also the components that he's spoken of, and they are in this budget, that speaks to modernizing, developing, and strengthening our nuclear arsenal as an American nation. The fourth pillar is building the wall, dismantling transnational criminal organizations, and enforcing immigration law. So this proposal seeks to provide funding for the wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for, but they're not paying for it anymore because he wants approval for funding to come in this budget. So a pledge to continue to fight MS-13 and other immigrant criminal organizations, to employ more ICE agents and more Border Patrol enforcement. Pillar 5, to rebuild our infrastructure, which is exactly what it sounds like: new bridges, railways, waterways, roads, things like that. This proposal claims to be able to generate $1 trillion in new infrastructure investment. Now, the key component there is the proposal only asks for $250 billion. And then it claims that that the government can leverage that $250 billion into a total of $1 trillion from private sector investments. So that is interesting on a multitude of levels. And again, that's one of the things that economists on both sides of the aisle say is simply not possible to be able to generate $1 trillion in private sector investments off of a $250 billion government investment. So moving on, Pillar 6, supporting American working families. Now, this speaks to, he talks about paid family leave in this proposal for new parents, skills training and apprenticeships programs, and maintaining programs that help America's working families. Now, for me, this pillar is kind of oxymoronic for the black community, but then we have to remember that when we hear politicians say working American families and the middle class, they're not talking about us. They're not talking about black people. When they're talking about black people, they use terms like African American, Black American, minorities, people of colors. So unless you hear those terms, they're not talking about you, which completely clears up what would otherwise be contradictory statements and policy practices, because you make statements like supporting American working families, but then you create policies that make it harder for black working families to survive. That only becomes a contradiction when you assume that when they say American working families, they're talking about black people. Once you understand that they're not, it becomes possible to move on and digest what they're saying. So then we go on to Pillar 7, which is protecting the veterans, which is exactly what it sounds like and exactly what everybody says and nobody does anything about. Improving VA care, medical treatment, being able to train and get education and things of that nature, malarkey. Moving forward, and yes, I said malarkey. Moving forward, Pillar 8, combating opioid addiction. And this proposal seeks to create a commitment to liberating communities from the scourge of opioids and drug addiction, which has been declared a public health emergency. Now, for most of us in the black community, this is a bit of a soft spot because it is a stark contrast to the way drug addiction is treated